the first or the most important topic which you must all have read in the newspapers, and there have been a lot of op-eds and articles and discussions on TV on that, which is rift between RBI and government. So, as you know that recently government has used Section 7 of the RBI Act, which we will discuss later on, which has never been used since independence. And the government and the RBI have been on deadlock. They have been deadlocked between RBI and the Ministry of Finance and the government on certain issues. So we will understand first of all the importance of independence of central bank. Then we will come to the contemporary issue, which is the rift between government and the RBI and the stand of both government and the RBI. So it is actually in news in last 6 months or 1 year that the government, not just in India but many parts of the world, are loggerheads with the central bank of those countries. So we have example of Trump, who has criticized the Federal Reserve for raising the interest rate. We have example of ECB or the European Central Bank chief, who is saying that the ECB needs to be saved from the government interference. We have example of Turkey, where Turkey has been, or the Erdogan government has been accused of compromising the independence and neutrality of the Central Bank of Turkey. Then we have example of India. So why is it common for the government and the RBI to have rift? It's not just in India, it's everywhere in the world. It's very common for the government and the RBI to not to be on the same page. First reason is that the objectives of government and the RBI differ, or the central bank differ. In a democracy, the government is elected by the government, but the central bank is not an elected body. It's a bureaucratic institution which does not have to face any election. So in a democracy, every government wants re-election, which means it is motivated by short-term interest. In every country, the term of a government is either 4 years or 5 years. So government, after 2-3 years, it knows that it has to fight elections after next 2-3 years. Therefore, even though in long run, if any policy creates inflation, but in short run it benefits the corporates and the common people, the government would definitely propose that kind of policy, while the central bank has a long-term objective because it does not have to fight elections. Its mandate in most of the country is to control inflation. Therefore, central bank has a long-term perspective, and it does not want any kind of populism, because it knows that populism will raise the inflation expectations in the long run. That is the main reason why the RBI and the government have been in conflict. If you remember the period of the last government, UPA, between 2009 to 2012, 13 times RBI has increased the rates of repo rates and the CRR. And at that time, the finance ministry blamed the RBI for the slowdown in the growth process, because you know that the growth slowed down between 2012 to 2014. The finance ministry held RBI's monetary tightening responsible for the slowdown in the economic growth, because the government blamed that because of increase in the repo rate, it has increased the interest rate in India to a very high level, which has discouraged the corporates from investment. So let us now understand the importance of independence of central bank. So we need an independent central bank for a reason that I have already discussed, because government tends to make poor decision with respect to monetary policy, because government would always want liquidity to be high in the economy, because high liquidity would mean people will have more money in themselves and the interest rate will be lower, which means that corporates will invest more, so it will create a demand in the economy. So therefore we require the independence of central bank in order to ensure that monetary policy is conducted on professional lines. Because in those countries where central bank has not been independent, we have seen hyperinflation. Zimbabwe is the biggest example. Mugabe, was in full control of the central bank. It told him to print more and more and more currency, which ultimately made the Zim dollars worthless. It happened in Argentina. So we have empirical evidence which clearly points out that in those countries where the government interfered in the central bank, it has faced disaster in the long run. Second reason why we need independent central bank is because independent central bank has more credibility. Which means that the foreign investors will continue to invest in India because they believe the central bank is independent. It also means that when central bank, through its repo rate, through its CRR, gives an indication that it wants this kind of policy, the market participants will actually accept it, right? Now, what are the concerns, or why is independent central bank dangerous? Well, as the people from the government side point out, the central bank has sole focus on controlling inflation. But in some countries like India, where inequality of wealth, where poverty, where unemployment, where growth is a bigger issue, the overemphasis of the central bank on inflation, it kind of ignores or neglects those other pressing issues which require much more attention than inflation. So the democratic government says that if central bank is too independent, it remains out of touch with the needs of with the pressing needs of the country. So this is the argument from the government side, that central bank should not be completely independent. Second argument is that central bank is not an elected body. And in a democracy, it should be the elected body which should take both the fiscal and the monetary decisions on the behalf of the people. So this is the second argument why the people from the government side believes that the independent central bank is not exactly required in a democracy, and government should have some control over the functioning of the central bank. So let's now look at the recent standoff of the RBI and the central government in India. Now please listen to what I say very carefully, because there will be some technical words used and I will explain them, but you have to listen to what I said very carefully. First reason is control over PSB, or public sector bank. So when the Nirav Modi incident took place, the central bank, or the finance minister Jaitley, it actually said that the response, it's a failure on the RBI part, because RBI is the regulator of the banking sector. So it is the failure on their part that they could not check the malfunctioning and the mismanagement which was going on in the PNB bank. While the RBI responded that we don't have enough powers to exactly micromanage the functioning of public sector banks. The RBI also said that since the dominant shareholder of PNB is the government. It is the responsibility of the dominant shareholder to scrutinize or to check whether the board or the functioning of the PNB is going on in a smooth way or not. So ultimately, government being the dominant shareholder in PNB, it is the government's responsibility, or it was the failure of the government part when this Nirav Modi scam took place. So therefore RBI said that if you want us to have a good or to ensure that future incidents do not take place, you give us enough teeth to micromanage the functioning of the PSBs. The second issue on which they are fighting is PCA framework. So PCA is prompt corrective action, and this RBI has introduced that for the weaker banks, the bank which have more NPA problems. So after the bank says, suppose the RBI says that bank X has a lot of NPA, it has given a lot of bad loans, so prompt corrective action is introduced in that bank, which would mean that bank X would be prevented from issuing further loans. It will be prevented from issuing further deposits. It will have to keep more reserve ratio as prescribed. It will have to, the capital adequacy ratio for that bank will also be more severe. Ultimately, it would mean that the RBI would have a greater control over the deposit taking and the lending taking and the day-to-day activities of that bank. So government is saying that, you know, by introducing PCA over 11 banks in India, you are actually preventing them from giving credit to those areas which require some credit. And as you know that the credit ratio in India, which is a signal or indicator of how much demand is there in the economy, have been falling over last 2-3 years. And government has blamed RBI responsible for that. Government says if you would have not introduced the PCA framework, then the 11 banks on which it has been introduced, they would have been giving more lending, they would have given more credit, and that would have boosted growth in certain areas of the economy. The RBI on the other hand is saying that you are a dominant shareholder of those banks. So if you want those banks to lend more, you should do some capital infusion on those banks. But you do capital infusion on those banks, and then the capacity of the bank to lend will increase, and we will put these banks out of the PCA framework. So that is what RBI is saying, that with a weak capital and with already having the NPA problem, we cannot allow those banks, or we cannot allow NPA problem to become worse in these banks. Therefore, if you want them to lend, you infuse more capital infusion. You introduce more capital infusion in those banks. Next is the NPA problem, or the NPA rules. So RBI in February has exactly brought out a new NPA rules, according to which if the corporates have a single, if they delay in returning principal and amount to the, or principal and the interest to the creditor, then the RBI has said that resolution process or the resolution plan can be invoked, which means suppose there is corporate X who has delayed by a single day in giving back the principal and the interest of the loan it has taken, then RBI has said that creditors can invoke a resolution plan under the insolvency and the bankruptcy code. Just by a single day, if a corporate is is delayed in giving loan. So the government is saying that this is hurting the corporate sentiments, and also most of the companies which have faced this rule, they are usually the power producers, and most of these power producers have a very good connection with the government, and they are actually forcing the government to tell the RBI that please, this rule is very draconian, and therefore it will hurt the corporate sentiments in the country, and this will actually slow down the industrial growth in India. The RBI, on the other hand, has refused to back down, and it says that this is necessary because otherwise these corporates will keep on delaying the payment of the interest and the principal for some excuse or the other, and it says that this will have a deterrent effect on the corporates to give their loan on time. Next is use of section 7. So section 7 is a very extraordinary provision given in the RBI Act. So see, RBI technically is a part of the government because government is a dominant shareholder in the RBI. But RBI has been given, under the RBI Act, it has been given autonomy from the government because in a mature democracy, the fiscal policy is run by the Ministry of Finance and the monetary policy is run by the specialized professional central bank. So section 7 has been an extraordinary measure which has been given to the government, and in which the government can give directions to the RBI for public interest. So for in a very difficult circumstances, the government can invoke section 7 of the RBI Act, and when the section 7 of the RBI Act will be invoked, the government has been given power that it can give directions to the RBI on what to do, what not to do. So after section 7 will be introduced or invoked, the government will give directions to the RBI, and there will be central board of directors which will be established by the government, and those central bank of directors will ensure that the directions given by the government would be implemented. So in a normal circumstances, the government has no right, it has no power to give any direction to the RBI because RBI is an autonomous body. But when the section 7 has been invoked by the government, then it will be mandatory for the government to follow the directions given by the government. So ultimately, if the government uses section 7, it means that the autonomy of the central government is diluted. And it has never been invoked in India since independence, whether it was 1991 crisis, whether it was 2008 recession, when the government and the RBI came in at loggerheads, but still the government did not use section 7. First time since independence this extraordinary measure have been used. That is why central bank is not happy, because once that section is used, it means that central bank is now a office of the government. Right. Next issue is the independent payment regulator. So this I have already covered in the last lecture, that the government has proposed independent payment regulator for the payment bank sector, but the RBI believes that it's a stupid move, and it is better that this sector also remains under the regulatory environment of the RBI. Next, and very important, is the RBI's reserves and surplus issue. This is very important, and you have to let me explain it differently because it's little technical to understand. So you must have read in newspaper that RBI, that government wanted, the dividend from the RBI, which RBI refused. And the reason why government wanted dividend, because the elections are coming, so government wanted to spend, to use some populist scheme, and for that it need money. So it told RBI to give its surplus to the government. So see, how does RBI generate surplus? RBI, as you know, is a non-profit body, but RBI has both the liabilities and the assets. So when we talk of liabilities, there are two main liabilities which RBI have. One is the currency note which it prints, and second is the reserves which the bank have in the bank or in the RBI. So CRR, SLR, etc. And on the asset side, the RBI invests in both domestic bonds and in international bonds. So when we talk of liabilities, the liability in the case of liabilities, RBI does not have to pay any interest for the liabilities. So it does not pay any interest for the reserve ratio. It does not pay any interest for the currency notes which it issues or it prints. While on the case of asset, the RBI gets interest income from both the domestic bonds which it has and the international bond it has. So technically, the RBI is in profit, and that profit, after meeting the expenses required for the RBI to run its offices, the salary payment, etc., is approximately 65,000 crores every year. And since the government is the main shareholder of the RBI, it's a government-owned, RBI is a government-owned company, so this surplus, most of this surplus is given to the government every year. So when government takes away all the surplus every year, and it's been happening from last 2 decades, whether it was a UPA government or this government, then why there is such a problem? There is such a problem because this time government has demanded not just the normal surplus, but it also wants special surplus from the RBI. And the special surplus will only be given when RBI prints more notes. So जो हर साल RBI को मिलता, जो हर साल गवर्नमेंट को मिलता था, वो तो इस साल भी RBI ने दे दिया. वो, that is not an issue. The issue is that government wants more surplus than which the RBI gives every year. Now RBI is concerned that if it will print more notes, it will create an inflation problem in the economy. Because RBI is not going to face election. RBI is a body, it's a bureaucratic body which is non-elected. And it has a long-term perspective. Therefore, the RBI has refused to give special surplus to the government, and this has irked the government, because government wanted this special surplus for the populist scheme it wants to create just before the elections. So this is the crux of dispute between the RBI and the government.
Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon on the YouTube app and never miss another update from Civil's Daily.